Great. So let us get started. But before we move on, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are joining from today, the Gadigal people of Eora Nation, and pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I also would like to extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders joining us today. What are we covering today? I will discuss the general overview of procurement as a service, touching on its benefits. Then we will move to the most interesting part of this webinar, which is a fireside chat with our guests. And then our panel will answer your questions in Q&A session. As you well know that during registration, some of you have put on some questions which we are going to respond to. Now, what does it mean when we say that procurement as a service is a modern way of taking care of organizations' procurement? It is essentially an outsourced procurement model that combines technology, people, and expertise to handle a portion or all of the organization's procurement function. In private sector, it is now becoming increasingly common for the organization of all sizes to outsource some or all of their transactional and strategic procurement activities. But this is not the case with the public sector, where councils find themselves. And I suppose maybe it is because, government procurement is very much regulated, and that's why probably we haven't gone to the same level as private sector. But definitely with the innovation and looking into how we can do better and faster, probably we will get there. So in some instances, based on procurement's comprehensive nature, procuring entities may devote a substantial amount of time and resources to manage complex procurement. And it is particularly difficult for small to mid-sized or remote regional councils to have required expertise in-house. Procurement as a service model offers greater value and flexibility because they can receive the expertise and tools they need on demand and only pay for what they need. As you all know, or many of you know, that there are some projects or different activities from our council customers that local government procurement consulting do run on their behalf. And this is pretty much the thing we are talking about, where procurement as a service can help councils to complement what they have. So for instance, we can run, or we have been running a number of RFTs, RFQs, EOIs, or sometimes do a lot of other things like procurement transformation exercise with our council customers, or run, say, video tutorials for training, or procurement awareness tutorials or webinars for our council customers. So that means that this model of delivery puts procuring entities in better control, as they will get the subject matter experts and technology needed to effectively run the procurement processes. Now, let me touch on some benefits of procurement as a service. Basically, the organizations will have access to professional sourcing experts in various fields, like if a council wants to run a tender, for instance, in construction, running a construction project like the one we are running for one of our customer councils, remote councils of construction of library and archive, and different types of goods and services, IT, or any other sort of procurement activities that you can outsource. So then by outsourcing, councils can immediately tap into a pool of experts. As you all know that local government procurement, since its inception in 2006, it's an expert organization that is focusing on local government. And when you are engaging local government procurement, for that matter, or local government procurement consulting team, that means you are bringing in a expert knowledge to run your project on your behalf. So as a customer, you don't have to invest in large systems. This is another benefit of procurement outsourcing, where you don't need to really invest into a huge systems that will help you to manage your procurement activities. You can, for instance, now, if say we run tenders for any given council, in many instances, we use our procurement, our e-procurement portal to run their tenders. So in that case, they don't really need to worry much about the technology, but definitely it has a very important component that the experts are being running or are being undertaking this project on your behalf. And continuing on the benefits, for instance, for regional and small mid-sized councils with limited budget and internal staff, time is a precious resource which they don't have in abundance. So that means that when this happens and you are engaging a professional organization or a professional provider, then you are covered. So by outsourcing procurement activities, your in-house team will no longer be distracted by tracking down the best suppliers of materials or services, or comparing costs, or otherwise trying to create an optimized procurement strategy, because you have already engaged a professional body or a professional provider who can run all this for you. So as a result, you can return to your core activities and have your full focus on them. And in the end, you are able to best meet the needs of your ratepayers. At this point now, we are coming to a very interesting part where we are inviting our guests. And the guests we have today for our fireside chat is Tariq Dahley, a procurement and optimization delivery manager at LGP. Tariq, welcome.
Thank you, Bruce.
And we also have Margaret Lanto, the head of consulting team here at LGP. Now, a little introduction about Margaret and Tariq. Maybe let me start with Tariq. Tariq is currently the procurement and optimization delivery manager, as I said. And Tariq has worked in multiple procurement roles in both government and the private sectors, and mainly in strategic procurement for government. And he worked also in construction, mining support, and offshore and onshore oil and gas. Tariq is a civil engineer and also has a diploma member of the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. And Margaret, on my right here, is our head of consulting. And Margaret has been with the LGP since inception. She happened to be a long time manager for tendering, and she has a wide knowledge of this sector. And also, Margaret is a fellow of World Commerce and Contracting. World Commerce and Contracting is an association dedicated to helping its members from all around the world achieve high-performing and trusted trading relations. So in this fireside chat, I have a few questions that I'm going to ask my guests. And my first question is that we hear a lot about procurement as a service, as a term that is relatively new for many of us and represents changes in thinking from past ways of procurement. How did we get here? Maybe I will probably not follow the normal protocol that we normally use. Maybe I will start with Tariq, not ladies first today.
Sure.
So Tariq, what's your perspective on this?
I'll start off by saying that procurement has really evolved over the years. Procurement is becoming focal to many organizations. It's playing, its role in terms of affecting the outcomes of any organization has changed. It's playing a bigger role. Most organizations now have CPOs. So the role of procurement has really elevated in over the years. And as procurement projects become more and more complex, organizations sometimes realize that they may be not positioned very well to deal with those. And that's where some of the procurement is, that's where procurement as a service is really picking up. Expert procurement service providers are able to provide or turn around things relatively quickly while still considering things like compliance, especially in the public sector where compliance any acts or regulations that we need to abide by is very important. Probity, typically procurement as a service will also consider probity, and I'm sure Margaret will touch on that, one of her favorite topics. And so that is definitely covered. So you don't need to really go out sometimes to get many different organizations to do one job. You can do it all by basically outsourcing this to one entity.
Wow, that's good. Now, Margaret, what's your perspective on this?
So I was actually going, as you were talking, Tariq, I was thinking and reflecting on conference I actually attended last week. It was ESG, which is Environmental Social Governance in Procurement. And I was reflecting on what it means to people in procurement, that the role of procurement and what's the expectation around procurement has expanded. So it is not about just going out and making a purchase. Certainly when we come into procurement and the methodologies around which procurement to choose, and the expectation with the net zero 2030, 2050 targets, Modern Slavery Act and other social procurement aspects, and looking at governance and probity. It is, so all of those three, plus the general procurement itself of purchasing and running tenders or running quotations, it's expanded to the point where there's a lot of things that people need to do. And that has happened faster, I feel, than the expansion of procurement teams within councils. Some councils, metro councils that are large, have been able to do that. Certainly City of Sydney has a large procurement team and they could probably handle all of those things, but they also have a larger amount of tendering that they do and procurements that they do. So they still need to incorporate all of these new functions. And one of the areas, of course, that we do understand that is also under the umbrella of procurement is contract management. But we all know from the the audit office report that came out, I think it was last year, that talked about the lack of contract management that existed across local government. That was a space that really needed to be focused on. And of course, that also then has all of those KPI measurements that require social aspects and modern slavery, and how, I mean, it's great to say modern slavery, but how do we actually measure that? How do we ensure that the contractors do all those? So it's being able to respond to all of those things that are either legislative requirements or that are real benefits from procurement. How do we do that when we only have 1 or 2 people that are actually assigned to procurement? So one way of doing that without, because it's going to be difficult for some councils to go from 1 person to 5 people that would probably need to do all of these things, is to, while the council is trying to develop its long-term planning around building a team, it can then, while it's doing that, outsource aspects and components of what it needs, whether it's strategic, whether it's contract management, whether it's probity. There are aspects that it can contract out and outsource while it develops its long-term planning to get to a point where it can do this in-house.
Great. Thank you, Margaret. Now, the next question is that councils, just like all other government entities, they are highly regulated when it comes to procurement. Now, a question to my guests here is, how would they do procurement? Councils, how would they do procurement outsourcing and remain compliant to the legislative requirements? Maybe this time, let me start with Margaret.
I think, so let me just, so I would say that I'm going to actually probably have conflicting responses to that. One, overarching, is that the councils, all councils must meet their legislative requirements. It's actually not something that you can outsource. So your obligation to meet legislation is yours. You cannot outsource that to somebody. So even if you use anybody, whether it's LGP or someone else, to do some of your procurement, you still need to ensure and make sure that you are satisfied that your compliance to legislation has been met. That being said, your selection of who you use based on their experience of legislatures, and in particular local government legislation, is going to maybe play a factor in the selection process of who you ask to assist you with those.
Absolutely, and that's where actually my point is that from local government procurement perspective, local government procurement being an expert in this domain, local government, then we stand to be the best procurement provider for our council customers.
There are a lot of consultants out there, and some councils or some consultants have had more dealings with councils than others. But we are, I suppose, and they're competent in what they do as well. The difference, I suppose, for us is that we were created for you.
Correct.
So our focus has always been councils and whatever legislation is that relates to.
That's good. Thank you, Margaret. Being mindful of time, maybe I would hear your perspective in a few words of this question.
Thanks, Everest. It's a very, very good question, and I think Margaret covered the main points about compliance with legislation is mandatory no matter who is actually doing the work. And what was mentioned that LGP is in a good position to help councils when it comes to outsourcing procurement, just because we know the legislation very well. We do it. We establish big suite of panels for the local government sector across many portfolios. So we need to abide by that. It's just part of our prescription. So we're well positioned. We understand what is required. We understand what's needed from a probity perspective as well. So that is probably an advantage of using somebody with public procurement experience. As Margaret said, there's also many entities who can do this, but some are more focused on, for example, some would be more focused on maybe private sector, probably manufacturing or construction or aviation, but with LGP, you're able to get that confidence that from a compliance perspective, that box will be ticked and it will be done in an appropriate way that minimizes any risk on the councils. Ultimately, there is a reputational risk for councils that they will need to think about when outsourcing such projects. And just a couple of good examples of when it's just a slight spin-off is when can you do such outsourcing? Some of the examples are it's a very complex, high strategic project, and you just don't have the capabilities in-house, as Margaret said. Many of the regional councils have one or two, and I've seen that myself, but speaking to
I believe you were our customer at one point too, because of resourcing issues.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. We did not have, we have a really big team that looks at LGP's tenders and panels, but we had to outsource some of that work to LGP's consulting team, and they were very big and complex projects that they were able to help us complete them. And they're currently, one of them is currently one of the fastest growing panels at LGP, and councils are really using that. That's a great example, Margaret. Another example is conflict of interest, and this is something that a consulting team has seen repeatedly when there's someone or certain position in council that wants to get involved. There might be probably perceived conflict of interest. So it might be good in these circumstances to actually outsource the work so you get rid of any potential, conflict of interest or perception. Yeah. Those are other reasons that you might want to outsource.
Right, thank you. Margaret, do you have anything to add before we move to the question and answers?
I suppose I was just going to comment that we were talking about the outsourcing. No, I think he's covered everything.
Okay, good. Now we have received a number of questions from participants who during registration, they have sent through their questions, and I would also encourage those ones who might have any questions to drop them via Dropbox, and our technical person will be able to see them and read them for us, and then our guests can respond to them. But in the meantime, I think I will touch on the questions that have come via registration. And one of the questions that I have in front of me here is that someone asked about how would you develop a marketing plan to sell your procurement services offered to internal stakeholders?
Are we talking about a marketing plan to sell procurement services internally? Is that a council person who wants to expand their procurement services and sell it to their executive? That is how the question has come in, and I suppose probably here it is about selling your procurement service that you offer to internal stakeholders. Now, if I get this question correct, maybe you can.
Yeah. So generally, procurement is underestimated. The value of procurement is sometimes underestimated. Procurement can add a lot of value. We all know that. It can add a lot of value to the bottom line when you look at more complex operations, to even safety. So what procurement needs to do to sell itself, to market itself, is to engage and to show its capabilities. And as procurement has started to play a bigger role, engagement has grown with it. And instead of being the instead of being that part of the organization that people just come to when they need a service, procurement is now actually that department that's initiating a lot of change, initiating a lot of benefits to organizations. And that's how procurement should be marketed, as a tool that can improve things rather than just being on the receiving end, procurement can actually initiate and lead a lot of the changes.
So this is where we talk about strategic procurement.
Yeah.
And following on, I suppose I'm going to jump back into the ESG conference that I attended, and even before the conference, is that what we're talking about here is, if I'm a procurement person and I'm one person in a council, how do I change the perception of the 800 staff in that council from seeing me as just a purchasing officer, and seeing me as a value add who can contribute to the strategic plan and goals of the actual organisation of the council. And I could sit here for hours telling you how you can do that, because it's really simple. You can, nearly every council now is going to have to somehow incorporate a strategic initiative around how they're going to manage modern slavery. The only way to manage modern slavery is through tendering, asking the tendering questions, then pushing that through into contract management, which is also under the umbrella of procurement, and then managing that and then monitoring that. So that's just the modern slavery part of it. How then, from a procurement point of view, you're also the person that can sell into council and say, how are we council going to meet the deadline of 2030? There are initiatives every single time you issue a tender or a, whatever it is that you're going out for, that can incorporate initiatives to advance everything that you pay for, with initiatives around the 2030, whether it's about energy, whether it's about your vehicle fleet, whether it's about how you manage your land and properties and parks and gardens. All of these can work towards that, and you are best placed as the procurement person to be able to incorporate that and show people how they can get the value out of it. So whether it's the community services director who looks after social aspects of the council, or whether it's the environmental people that are looking at the environmental initiatives for 2030, or whether it's the executive level who want to see all of these things tick boxes they go along to meet their own strategic goals.
Okay, thank you, Margaret. I guess again, for the interest of time, I think we'll be very brief on answering the questions, but and also I will be respectful to the ones who have sent the questions through, and I would just want to read them so that at least we can say something about it. Now, the second question here is that if you are limited on available resources, what or how could you utilize external resources to support your department procurement service objectives? I think this is the main discussion that we have had.
I think, I mean, very quickly, I mean, any way you want, really, because if you're talking about you're limited on services, we're currently, and I know, I'm going to try and do this really quickly, I'm really sorry. We know at the moment with the Great Resignation that a lot of councils are going through recruitment issues, as are we, as are other organisations. I know that a lot of us have, in particularly, lost procurement staff to New South Wales Transport for New South Wales, because they're doing a lot of building, and so and so we're all sort of struggling with that, and councils in particular certainly are. But the thing is you break down what you need. What do you need? And then look at how we can help you, or how consulting in procurement services can help you.
Yeah, that's good. I guess I jumped on another question. Can you please identify in the Act and in the regulation that permits council to engage the services of the LGP list without tendering or doing a competitive call?
Yeah, it's basically LGP is a prescribed entity under Section 55 of the Act, and in that that act basically says that prescribed, if the council uses a prescribed entity, they do not have to go out to tender. And then the regulation, I think it's section 177 of the regulation, basically lists LGP as a prescribed entity. So what that means is if you are intending on purchasing anything above the $250,000 threshold, you can use a prescribed entity without going out to tender. So all you need to do is just probably issue an RFQ that includes the specs and just pricing schedule, deadlines, expected delivery, etc. And that should suffice from a legislation perspective.
Great, thank you. Maybe to another one that is it the intention of LGP to grow this procurement as a service function solely within LGP, or would there be a third party partner involved? Margaret.
Solely within LGP. I mean, we use panel of consultants sometimes when we have overflow, and they would be as our subcontractor, but not sure what the question is.
Definitely, it is a LGP consulting team. This is one of the services that we provide, and we're definitely looking at growing it within to be able to meet the needs of our council customers. Maybe let me jump on another one quickly. Here someone asks, any tips on raising the profile and the image of procurement within councils would be great.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. And so for those of you that might know me from back in the day, LGP has always been about providing in the first place when we first started, it was about providing councils with panel contracts that they could utilise. The second thing has always been about upskilling through our training program and promotion. And for those of you that know Phil Scott, who's now our CPO, his move away from manager tendering contracts into the CPO role meant that he was freed up from operational activity, and Unabove has taken that over and has freed him up to do the advisory aspects of his role. That is really, really important. And part of that advisory role is to elevate procurement profession. He is also a fellow of World Contracting along with myself, to elevate the procurement profession within local government in New South Wales, in councils in New South Wales, so that we are promoting you as procurement people within councils, so that your CEOs, GMs, and executive members are starting to recognise the fact that the procurement, hopefully, one, is being recognised, two, is being incorporated into the strategic plan, and hopefully, if we can get there, you'll all have CPOs one day sitting at the table, because that is the ultimate goal.
Right. Yeah, I just want to add one thing on that. I think Margaret, you also mentioned earlier aligning with council strategy.
Yeah.
That's one way of improving the image of procurement, is by aligning with strategy. I think that's key. And also sometimes showing cost savings. That's another way. Sometimes in procurement, we do a lot of work without actually showing the benefits. So try to include that at the end. And then
cost benefits, though, it can be life cost benefits. It doesn't actually have to be the bottom line cost of a tender, but the overall contract benefits.
Yeah,
that's good. Now this other question where someone says, is this on vendor panel or a separate software package? This is not on vendor panel. This is procurement as a service, is a service we provide from local government procurement consulting team.
So that's the services that are probity auditor, probity advisor, procurement, strategic procurement, running facilitation of tenders, and all the other things that you mentioned about video tutorials and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and the other questions, some of them have been addressed in the presentation where someone was asking about the benefits of this new procurement model, which we discussed in our presentation. And another one was would be interested in the strategic reward that procurement as a service delivers to the council, which we discussed about is part of the benefits. And someone also asked about change management strategies. I really don't understand very well about what the question is all about, but I guess change management strategies.
Okay, so change management strategies. You can have change management, which is a discipline on its own, or you can have change management that is connected to procurement initiatives. What change management can be applied when you're trying to introduce contract management principles, where you're trying to, change management can be a sort of a project that we did with a council, which was called Building Probity Principles. And what that meant is they didn't have any. There was maybe a probity policy somewhere that people refer to, but it wasn't a principle. It didn't have a construct around it, a framework. It didn't have a process underneath. And so we were helping them build that with tutorials, you know, with putting together a panel arrangement for them so that they can actually building a whole probity program. So that's one of those.
Okay. Maybe we move on. There's another question, if I could call it that way, but it is, you know, it has a little background of it. As someone says, core requirements of best practice. The tile does not get moved from start to finish to low level admin that anyone can do to take responsibility for a bad contract. So in my time, the management definition of procurement has varied. Generally, a lack of respect from accountants and engineers would be a recurring theme across local government.
Look, that's very unfortunate. That's very unfortunate. That's definitely not the picture that we envisage for procurement. And I think to fix that, to fix such issues, it's applying some of what we spoke about today, like really understanding what is the council's strategy, trying to align, trying to be more proactive, trying to engage more with the engineers and with the accountants, and trying to hold them also accountable for things. Procurement has a role to play again across the entire business, and these two stakeholders, engineers and accountants, are ones that procurement personnel deal with on a regular basis. So it's how to fix that relationship, how to appreciate what each one is doing and what is expected of each department. But yeah, look, again, this is a very unfortunate, and procurement should be more strategic than that. And this is, look, this ties in nicely with the change management. What needs to change to elevate procurement in this organization? And LGP has change management culture embedded within it. We do a lot of change management, and that is something that we can possibly help you with. Understand the root cause, and then take you on that journey to changing that perception.
Can I give a for example?
Sure.
For an example, we did work late last year, early this year for a particular council where we went in so we were requested and we went in at the executive level. And so we were talking about, because they felt that there was a need because of the audit report that came in, and this particular council was actually named. So they wanted someone to come in and look at what they had, and then provide them with some recommendations around how to improve procurement, and underneath procurement, the contract management, which obviously was not there as well. So we did this. We call it a procurement transformation rather than a review. Review just has that word that makes staff feel uncomfortable. And through that exercise, what we ended up doing was providing recommendations, and some of the recommendations were that procurement had to be elevated. It had to be given its own box in the organisational chart, because it wasn't. It was just, you know, it was just a line item sitting under finance. That's not what procurement is. Procurement has so many other accountabilities, but it has so much benefit as well. It really is. And the way to do that is always to look at large organizations that have huge, that have CPO recognition that there's a CPO, there's a function for that person. Yes, it works in with CFO and it works in with operations or engineering or whatever it has to do, but it has its own place. It can't exist on its own, but neither can any of the others. Because ultimately an organization is one and all of the cogs need to work.
Yeah, thank you, Margaret. And another question someone says here, details of how procurement as a service can facilitate local councils in the implementation of strategic sourcing strategy. I think we have discussed this, but any additional comment?
Yeah, look, I'll just add that again. From a strategic perspective, procurement as a service can help align a procurement department or procurement services at a council with that strategy. It is doable.
I see that as a workshop type environment where you come in and you do a couple of days of workshopping with the people that need to be there to develop that, because every council is different and every organisation is different to develop what is that strategy that they need.
Oh, that's good. Another question, we're intending to read all the questions that we have received so that, we have that respect to people who have put the question through. Now, another question here says that, what would you consider to be procurement added value to the local government, and how can we work with our stakeholders to become aware of it?
Well, from my point of view, it's probably everything that we talked about. So your stakeholders are many. Your stakeholders are your executive team, staff in councils who buy off arrangements that you put in place. It's the community with the outcomes of whatever procurement you've just done, and that it benefits the community. The councillors who, hopefully get really great feedback from the procurements that they've signed off on, that you've been able to put through. And those, when we're talking about good outcomes, so it's not, and I'm pleased that I'm actually hearing this more and more. We're doing all of these network sessions with LGP going into the we did two in Sydney. We're doing our last one today, this week at Griffith, and we're getting really good feedback from everybody that people are starting to move away from the cheapest price to the best outcome. So as long as we're talking about outcomes, we're meeting objectives. As long as those objectives align with strategic goals, you've got it made.
Right. Another one is, what procedures need to occur if a company awarded an RFT sell the business to another party? Does this negate the RFT, or does it pass on to the new owner?
Difficult. I suppose it depends. So you're saying an RFT. So I'm understanding from this that the acquisition actually takes place while the tender is in progress. And if the tender is in progress, you alert the tender officer that this has occurred. And from an LGP point of view, I know that we used to, and I'm pretty sure that we still do, we accommodate those things. And as long as the incoming party agrees to the same condition, and they are put through the same, you're testing them against the same criteria, and they're, they meet all the same compliances, then you can move it through I'm not even sure it's a novation, because I know that LGP does a lot of novations after award of contract. So this is when they're in contract already. You can simply just novate it, but even then the novation is not automatic. It is only after you've interrogated the new owners to make sure that they are, their CSR and everything else that they
Thank you, Margaret. I guess for the interest of time, we are a little over time now, but there's one question that the last one here that I have what are the issues with implementing and operating procurement as a service?
From my perspective, is making sure a really good conversation is developed between the buyer, you, and the service provider, us, or whoever it is, and getting a very good understanding on what it is your need is, because a lot of times people get bogged down with a list of items they want in the scope of the services they're asking for, rather than the need. This is what our need is. You know, I have a resourcing issue, or I've got an overflow of work, or you know, whatever it is. I think sometimes it's just like when you go to tender. In the background, you're saying this is what the need is, and then you go into the scope of services and getting that right. Because if that's not right, then you can get miscommunication and frustrations that occur.
Yeah, look,
Anything to add?
yeah, I'll just add exactly what Margaret just said. Look, it's really outcome based. What is the outcome that that the council would like from a procurement as a service? And there's actually a lot more. So once LGP or once any organization looks at those outcomes, they can then determine what else they can add and where they can add additional value in response to that need.
Yeah, thank you, Tariq. I guess we have gone over time, and we have now come to the end of our webinar today. And I would like to thank every one of you who have joined us today for the Procurement as a Service webinar. And please, if you are interested and want to know more about procurement as a service and other offerings that OGP procurement consulting team offers to you, please get in touch with us, and we will be happy to help.
We have got 2 questions in the chat, sorry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So this is from Innovest Council. The first one is, there are many barriers when implementing procurement as a service, but I would say the biggest one is fear. Fear to change and leave the comfort zone. Is there any examples of local councils that have already completed outsourced procurement?
Okay, so when we talk about outsourced procurement, I'm thinking that the person that's asking the question is actually outsourcing. So there's different models to it, and because of all of these resourcing issues that we have around the Great Resignations, we've actually had an opportunity. We're currently having opportunities with discussions with a couple of councils around different models. Now, when I talk about different models, one model is where we're looking at possibly LGP hiring a person, a part-time person, sits in our office, but is dedicated to a council, or and then they do the work for that. Well, the benefit of that is they are sitting inside of a procurement aggregator. They have the ability to go to any one of the people that work here and get really good advice in what they're doing for that council. And we and you're saving on the on cost of a permanent employment situation. So that's an area that we're also looking into, especially with those remote councils that are having difficulty attracting really good procurement people out into the regions.
Okay.
Thank you, Maggie. This is the second one from the same Innovest Council. As Margaret said, complying with legislation is always the council's responsibility. Mm. Then when outsourcing procurement, all risk stays with council. How can we mitigate risk?
Choose someone who knows your business. So, like you test when you go to tender. It's the same as when we do all of our tenders. How do we mitigate the risk of choosing the right people that are going to be on panel? Is to make sure that, like when you're doing a legal tender or wherever there's accreditations, or whether any of that, our accreditation is the fact that we are prescribed. We're a prescribed entity, and we are. And all of our people go through our own training sessions that a lot of councils, have gone through as well. And it is even our training modules, as well as everything we do, is all about councils. And as I said, we're also now involved at the advocacy level. So Phil's always engaged with the OLG, the LG New South Wales and other advocacy groups looking at legislation itself.
Great. Once again, thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us.